Hey, how are you doing? You feeling okay? I hope you're in a place of ease so that we can start to feel uneasy. Today we're breaking all the rules. We're filming in front of the window. I don't know why this video is also becoming an ASMR video. Hi, welcome back to my channel. You read the title. Today's video is going to be the most disturbing books that I've read. I guess you can take this as a recommendations video if you would like. I have some of them sitting right there, but in terms of like how am I defining a disturbing book, these are utterly and completely personal. These books made me uneasy. They dismantled something inside of me, and I was deeply uncomfortable, deeply disturbed in the way that these books had shifted something to make me so anxious, on edge, questioning things I never wanted to question before. So this list is completely personal. You'll notice that there aren't really a lot of like horror books on here. I guess that's not the kind of recommendations video that this is. This is just going to be books that really deeply unnerved me, and maybe they will you, because I'm going to explain why they did. One person could read these books and be like, you know what, that didn't bother me at all. Much like horrors and thrillers can freak out a lot of people, they really hardly do anything for me unless it's like a psychological, spatial kind of horror. You already know what book is going to be on this list, and yeah, most of these are very like psychological, or they deal with something that is just for some reason hit on a deep seated fear within me. I know a lot of you guys like your disturbing fiction as well, so let me just give you some disturbing books on this fine day. Jusqu'au moment il y a un train. Ok, c'est passé. These are also in no particular order, although there is definitely one to me on this list that is the most disturbing. I'll probably save that for last. Yes, so this first play, it's a play. I've read it 3 times. I've never seen it performed. Each time, oh god, each time I read it, something new pops out at me, and I'm like, that's so disturbing. This author, this person, that's his thing. He's so good at like dealing with topics of death and disability and eternity and time and suffering is his big theme. And in Endgame by Samuel Beckett, these people suffer endlessly. It seems like this play goes on forever. It seems like once you reach the end, you're just supposed to go back to the beginning in this space where people are never leaving, because it chronicles 4 people who are staying inside this house. Maybe it's the end of the world. We kind of get the sense that something is not right beyond the house because they can't leave the house. The outside world is decimated, so you could easily read this as like an apocalyptic kind of situation. We have Nag, Nell, Clov, and Ham, and they're all staying in this house together, and they are all trying to live alongside each other, but the way that their life is reduced in Endgame is very unnerving to see. Of course, the title does reference like a chess game, but in Endgame it's kind of just like a stalemate. Things are so stale. There is so much suffering. Nag and Nell live in trash bins. So much commentary about like, what are you supposed to do when like you have to go on living. Beckett doesn't consider suicide as an option to the human existence. That's just not a thing. So these characters just have to go on indefinitely in this world of gray, suffering, turmoil, disability. They're all maimed in some way, shape, or form. They have to witness each other's suffering. A lot of these relationships are very abusive. Ham is a tyrant. His parents are Nag and Nell, who live in the garbage bins. There's a huge commentary on like elderly people, specifically I guess elderly people's homes, the way that Western society kind of like pushes them out of the way. Like no one really looks at them, no one sees them, they just pop them into nursing homes, which more often than not have really bad conditions. The second time I read this play, I read it all the way through, and then I threw up. Yeah, I don't know if that was because of the play or because of something that I ate, but I threw up after I read Endgame, and that's my story on Endgame. Like, this is a conversation, and this is the way that conversations work in Endgame. Ham, look at the ocean. Clov, never seen anything like that. What? A sail? A fin? Smoke? The light is sunk. We all knew that. There was a bit left. The base? Yes. And now, all gone. No gulls? Gulls? And the horizon? Nothing on the horizon? What in God's name could there be on the horizon? The waves? How are the waves? The waves? Lead. And the sun? 0. But it should be sinking. Look again. Damn the sun. Is it night already then? No. Then what is it? Gray. Gray? Did I hear you say gray? Light black from pole to pole. Like this, I don't know, I feel like it just has the capacity to drive you absolutely insane. Like a lot of the characters aren't here. So that is Endgame. Love it, but once you read it, you can't get rid of it. It's gonna stick to your body like charry glue. That will never really leave you. You could spend like literally forever with this play, I feel like, but you'd probably lose your mind. So next up we have the Iliac Crest. This is one of my favorite books of all time. This is by Rivera Garza. I love this to pieces, but yes, deeply disturbing. This one, I guess, kind of more on a personal level. The book really deals a lot with gender identity, women's writing, women and women's writing being disappeared, wiped off the face of the earth. The author in her introduction does invite you to read this book with the femicides that occur along the Mexican-US border in mind. This is kind of unlike anything else I've read. I haven't really seen something like this before. I think it was just so tantalizing, but it also invites you into so much, like, just that feeling you get down the back of your spine when things are off, when things are not right, when you're reality. That's the thing that scares me. Let's go deep into our fears today. Something that always freaks me out, I think maybe one of the first times that I ever saw it, okay, was in the Spiderwick Chronicles, and it's that moment of identity reversal or identity misapprehension, miscalculation. Like, you think someone is someone, you think you know someone, but then they like take off a mask or they transform and suddenly they are not the person you thought they were. And it's this moment of like absolute betrayal, but also this moment of knowing that like your senses have betrayed you, like fallen for a wrong identity. It's the moment in the Spider Chronicles when like his dad walks into the house and he's like, oh my gosh, it's my dad, he's back. But it's also that moment where like you believe in something so fully because you want to believe in it, you want it to be true, but in reality it can't really be true, but you kind of ignore all of the warning signs. And then like his dad turns into one of the big bad monsters, and it still gets me every single time something like that happens in movies. You're like, oh, mom, and then it's not your mom. It's kind of like the other mother situation in Coraline. Things like that freak me out so badly. And something kind of like that happens in the Iliac Crest, because we have our narrator. He is like, yo, I'm a man. Two people show up at his door in the middle of the night, and they're knocking really incessantly, because it turns out one of the women is an ex-lover of his, and the other one is the very famous Mexican writer Amparo de Villa. They come into his house and they're like, you know what? You've been pretending really well that you're a man. You're doing a great job of it, but we know your secret and we know that you're actually a woman. And our narrator is like, excuse me? And then this book gets so weird and I love it, but it deals a lot with like boundaries between life and death, between genders, gender identity, obviously the real boundary, the line between Mexico and the United States. A story about bodies disguised as a story about language, disguised as a story about night terrors. It discusses so much in such a short period of time, and it just keeps getting more and more unsettling. There's also a lot to do with like hospitals and patients and the sick in here, because our narrator works at a hospital on like a cliff overlooking the ocean at like seemingly the end of the world. I don't know what's happening in Toronto today, but if you can hear 1,000 million vehicles doing their thing, I don't know. The big thing about this though is disappearance, like the things that go missing when no one is paying attention to them, when no one is fighting for them to stay around. We have Davila's writing, her stories are going missing, like she's going missing. It just really makes you think about like, who have I read? What have I been reading? What is language? What language am I losing? What language am I using? How is this language gendered? Like, who is it created by? And it just really hits you in the way that like when people's experiences are wiped off the face of the planet, you are no longer able to have those experiences to be able to describe your own experience. And it just absolutely creates this decimation of expression when these people's stories are wiped out, because they're no longer touchable, they're no longer tangible, whether they've been literally stolen by someone else or whether someone is actively trying to erase somebody. Technical problem break number 1, but yes, if you like hospitals, dealing with the sick, dealing with gender, dealing with all of those things in a very disturbing, unsettling way, the Iliac Crest is 100% for you. Next up, this is one that I feel like probably isn't making it to a lot of like the most disturbing books list, but for me it just is. And that is Leave the World Behind by Rumaan Alam. I listened to this on audiobook. I don't think the writing, first of all, is the strong suit of this, but I think the issues that it dealt with, Calcifer's out here playing bowling, apparently. Compared on the back to Shirley Jackson a little bit, which I guess I agree with, but this is about a family of 4 from New York City, and they go to stay, is it Long Island? I don't know if it's Long Island, but it's somewhere. It is Long Island. Yes, it is Long Island. So they just want like a quiet time. Go to an Airbnb, they're having fun. There's a lot about like consumerism and vacation, which is a topic that I really love. In the middle of the night, the couple who owns the Airbnb, they show up and they're like, hey, there's been a blackout in New York City. We need to stay here. We didn't know where else to go. But like no one knows if this is true or not because no one's cell phones work. Like there's no coverage out there. It's pretty remote. And so no one knows if anyone is telling the truth. It's like very tension-filled, extremely tension-filled. But the things that freaked me out the most in Leave the World Behind is that, yes, it does deal with climate emergencies, climate change, and there is a lot of weird things that start happening. Ultimately, this book deals with, like, the inability of our characters to deal with negative capability or being capable and comfortable with not knowing something. When these people get removed from their cell phones, they are useless. Every single instinct, knowledge, awareness of the world that they have is thrown into question, but really thrown into like stark contrast with nature because they are so out of it. They are so confused. They start to question everything. They're going through like withdrawal from the internet and from their cell phones. I wish on a daily basis, like sometimes I just get so freaked out being on my phone that I wish I could just like throw it in the blender or throw it out. If there's a day that like Instagram ever goes down or like the power goes out, I experience such a flood of relief that it's actually insane. Like if I could just go somewhere, be stranded on an island without my phone, without the internet, I would experience so much relief. But like in Leave the World Behind, it just makes you question how much you cling to the wealth of information that we have, the ability to look up something with the touch of a finger, and you see what these people have to go through when they're placed in like an emergency situation where things are weird, like weird things just keep happening with nature. And I don't know, I just found it so unsettling, so frightening. Then to kind of explain it better, because I was really wondering like why did this book freak me out so bad? Why? It's also getting made into a Netflix show. One of you guys told me. Very exciting. Or movie or something. But then I read Solar Bones in university after I read Leave the World Behind, and this one kind of just explained my fear of it, because this is also a story about like connections and people experiencing disaster, people having to come together or come apart in times of need, but it discusses a lot about like the disaster, like the theory of the disaster. I also get really freaked out as well when like in real life or in TV shows, you know how like animals know when something is going to happen, but we somehow don't have that ability. They know instinctively where to go. If there's like a forest fire or something like that, you see a lot of animals in Leave the World Behind knowing so much more than our people do. This quote just really embodies it perfectly. Were we so blind to the world teetering on the edge that we never straightened up from what we were doing to consider things more clearly? Or have we lost completely that brute instinct for catastrophe, that sensitivity now buried too deep beneath reason and manners to register, but which, once upon a time, was alert to the first whining vibrations radiating from those stress points likely to give way first? That primal faculty which lies in the less evolved reptilian part of our brain, and which we credit to dogs and vermin and birds as the ready reflex to flee or take flight en masse just before the ground or the tree or the building beneath them begins to shudder. Their primal attunement to danger, stampeding them in droves from buildings and structures before they come crashing down around them, a sensitivity we have lost, apparently. Yeah, I think that was kind of more why it freaked me out so much. Just a really eerie situation coupled with like this addiction and this need for cell phones and information and technology, while also like them not really trusting in each other. They are cut off entirely from like the news, from what's going on, their survival skills, their medical skills. It's just like they have lost all of it. They've kind of left the world behind because they no longer have access to the world through technology because it's been taken away from them. So I just found that really frightening. Also, Rumaan Alam's writing in a lot of parts was really grotesque. It was just really grotesque the way things were described, like very graphic in very specific ways. It just combined in this like little pot of uneasiness that made my stomach this little gurgling, bubbling thing, and I was like, and then I also read it before, like a week or two before I went to a cottage up north where there's no cell service, so it just freaked me out even more. Yeah. Anyway, that's Leave the World Behind. The next disturbing book that I've read is Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. This is a piece of Polish literature, and it deals so much with topics that are, again, really important to me, really frightening to me. Deals a lot with animal cruelty, with crime. It does remind me, weirdly, a little bit of Crime and Punishment, but it's about this woman, and she is in, like, once again, a border village. Her job is to take care of basically everyone's little cottages, because people really only come to this place for the summer. It's like their vacation home again, but she lives there all year round, along with her, like, 2 other neighbors. One of them is called Bigfoot, and they're very secluded, very isolated. It kind of deals with like when you're just cooped up and you have cabin fever, when you're kind of going a little bit insane. She kind of only has her dogs to talk to. Like the way that the story is told is just so spooky. Like it starts on this winter night when her neighbor chokes to death on this like little bone, like this little animal bone that he found in his throat. Anyway, people start showing up dead, like people who come to this area, mostly poachers, some random people, but they just start dropping dead. And on every crime scene there are so many deer hoofs, like there's just hoof prints. Thing starts to spread that like the deer are killing people. The deer in the woods are taking revenge and killing people. It's so much more than that, but it was just so unsettling. I really liked it. It discusses so many different things. I think that's all I want to say about Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead, because I don't want to talk too deeply about this one. I think this one is really good to go into pretty blind. Very disturbing. I think Olga Tokarczuk's way of telling the story is so sinister and eerie, very atmospheric. It almost reads kind of like, it is a crime kind of detective novel as well, in a way you could look at it. So that is Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead. Highly recommend. Next up, I mean, I think every disturbing books list probably has to have Lolita by Nabokov on it. I read this years ago, well before I started my booktube channel, and I have not read it since. I think it would be so interesting for me to read this again, because I read this while I was still in high school, and I don't think I got as much out of this as I could have done. Also, arguably, maybe the more disturbing thing here is that on the back there's a blurb by Vanity Fair that calls this the only convincing love story of our century. I've been like trying to figure out what they kind of mean by that, or like what other meaning could be there, and like the convincing love story of our century, because Lolita is about pedophilia. So I'm concerned, confused, Vanity Fair. I'm like, what did you mean by that? It's about this man named Humbert. It's like his confession. He opens the book being like, I'm a murderer. Let me tell you my story, judge and jury. So Humbert marries this woman, but not because he loves her or because he wants to be with her, because he's obsessed with her young daughter, who's named Lolita. So it's all about their story. So many things happen. Like I said, he tells us sentence number 1, he's a murderer. He tells us sentence number 2, this preoccupation with young girls has happened before in the past. And he also says that he's gonna tell us all about his basically life with Lolita and what happens. Extremely disturbing, although Nabokov's writing is literally exquisite. Like, I cannot wait to read more from Nabokov. This is the only piece I've read from him, so yeah, Lolita obviously had to be on this list. Next up we have The Blind Owl by Hedayat. I read this last year in 2022. This book is said to have a curse on it. For the longest time it was said that this book was cursed, and the story went, I'm not really sure how the story came about, but maybe it started with the author, I'm not sure. It said that every person who read this book, by the end of it, would kill themselves. Obviously that's not true, but the story got attached to The Blind Owl. This was banned as soon as it came out in Iran. In fact, it came pre-banned by Hedayat because he knew that his country was going to ban it. So the first page of this book that he wrote himself, the printing and sale of this work in Iran is forbidden. And then the first sentence of the story is, in life there are wounds that, like leprosy, silently scrape at and consume the soul in solitude. This book felt like a fever dream to me. It felt very like I was not in a good place reading this book, but like I was in a good place before I started reading this book. So this book does have a ton of power to change the way that like your mood is, because while and after I finished reading this book, I was feeling so disgusted, disoriented, very confused, very like, what is life, very uncomfortable, and just overall very disturbed and uneasy, because this is about a man who is very sick. We don't really know a lot. The story changes a lot as well. It's very hard to read, I think, which makes the disturbing aspect all the more puzzling, because you can't really get to the bottom of the one specific thing that is so disturbing about the blind owl. But he's sick. He tells us that he sees this woman outside of his house. He's like obsessed with her. She comes into his house. She falls asleep. He may or may not be a murderer. Really awful things happen. And then it's like you snap your fingers and all of a sudden the story changes. And we realize that maybe these were hallucinations, maybe nothing is real, but we do get like patterns and motifs to kind of help us along. Like we have similar characters, similar attributes. There's a lot about looking. There's a lot about who the hell am I? Like, am I just an amalgamation of everyone and everything around me? Am I distinct? Are other people distinct? How do I know they're distinct? Time isn't steady. Your identity isn't fixed. Nothing is trustworthy. Everything is unreliable. It really affected me, really affected me when I was reading this, so it had to be on this list as well. Another book that deeply disturbed me is When We Were Orphans by Ishiguro. I've talked about this recently in a couple of videos, so I'm not going to hammer on too long about this one, except to say please read it. It is the definition of like a book going off the rails. This book goes off the rails and it takes you with it, and you can't get off the train and you're just stuck there and you are gonna suffer. This is about a guy. He says, "Hi, I am a detective. I am looking for my parents. Have you seen my parents? Do you know where my parents are?" This man is obsessed with his mother and father because they've gone missing from his life, and he is kind of roaming around in the middle to upper class, I guess, society of, I think, London, and he's meeting all these people. He's like, "I'm gonna tell you all my detective cases," and then we kind of get thrown back into his memory in early childhood when he was growing up in Shanghai. We eventually do go back to the scene of the Sino-Japanese War, and things get so weird, man. Like, things just get so weird. This was really disturbing to me because it really just peels back kind of everything that I thought a stable narrative could be or could do. Like, I think Kazuo Ishiguro, he just takes you places in this book and you're kind of like, what is this? Like, I really just bought into everything in this book, and that's why it affected me so much more deeply when things all of a sudden weren't what I was expecting. Again, it is that feeling in like the Spiderwick Chronicles when you think you know something and you find out that you don't know something. Yes, very disturbing, very affecting. When We Were Orphans is very good and very disturbing. So that is that one. The second last book I have here is Season of Migration to the North. This one is filled with a ton of violence, a ton of murder, a ton of abuse and racism, and the conflict between, I think, mostly the UK, because we are split between London in this one and Sudan. We have this man named Mustafa who is telling his kind of life story, but more his story of like education and subsequent revenge on Western society to our unnamed narrator, who is quite similar to Mustafa. He details his time in London, how he was used and abused and treated as like an exotic commodity, met met with a ton of racism, refusal to do things, but then also like heralded as kind of this symbol for people who wanted to be like, wow, we're so progressive, look at us. So he was just used in every single way. Yeah, this is really disturbing for me for obviously all of those reasons, but then it very psychological, very quickly becomes psychological, and you follow Mustafa and a number of relationships that he's had with women in London and what he's done to them to get revenge on the West. One of the greatest novels I've ever read. Extremely well written. There's so much to get at in here, but just extremely unsettling. Very, very unsettling to me. So that is Season of Migration to the North. Okay, and finally we have the last book, which probably comes as no surprise because this is probably the book on here that's like affected me the most, and it's been a number of years since I've read it, and it's House of Leaves by Danielewski. This monster of a tome just kind of changed my life. It deals a lot for me now. It's more impactful for me now, I think, because I was once sitting down to talk with one of my professors, and we were talking about House of Leaves. It just came up. It was at a time when I had just recently received my brain injury, when I had just gotten my concussion, and I was trying to describe to him like what it was like, and describe my concussion as like House of Leaves, and I would still say that is true. If you've read this, good lord, I swear literally every single time I try to talk about House of Leaves, something goes wrong. So my camera just shut off again. People are dropping giant poles outside apparently. House of Leaves is about a house that is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. I didn't think it was scary, but then my professor, because this was on a course in my second year, got up in front of the class and he was like, you know what, if you need to stop reading this at any point, that's okay, because this book did things to me that I'll never be able to talk about. And then I started reading it and I really fell deep into it. Like, it really affected me. Essentially this couple buys a house. It's kind of like, you know, the American dream. They have 2 kids, they have a husky, and they have this house. He is a famous photographer. Totally forget what she does. But then they find out that like things aren't right. Sometimes they try to walk down their hallway and their hallway gets bigger. The book does hit on like trauma, the way that trauma changes your spatial awareness, your spatial perspectives, what it does to you, even in like smaller instances of like, I'm talking about across a period of time. For example, when you have a panic attack, for a lot of people, myself included, your surroundings aren't the same anymore. You've suddenly gone from your normal home to a very hostile environment where things can look, feel, taste, and smell completely different than what you are used to. But essentially the thing with the house in House of Leaves is that there's like a theory in here that the house's mutations reflect the psychology of anyone who enters it. The house, the halls, and the rooms all become the self, collapsing, expanding, tilting, closing, but always in perfect relation to the mental state of the individual. It's also a huge like Russian doll narrative. There's so many different stories stacked one on top of the other because you have people experiencing the house through the documentary that the photographer takes of his house, but then you have people discovering the film, and then you have this guy reading the transcript of the film, and then you have the reader reading the transcript of the film that someone took of their house. This is a book that you famously sometimes have to read upside down or tilt to the side. There's pages missing. There are tons of pages with just one word. There's pages that look like this. There's pages that are just completely sideways. So it does deal a lot with spatial horror, which I think is one of the more horrifying genres of horror to me. Space isn't anymore what you thought it would be. Like, all of your perspective has changed, and with the concussion that just made this so much more impactful to me, so much more scary, because that was a really big thing with it, which I don't want to talk about too much because like it is kind of really scary. But I don't know what's happening. My camera just died again. Maybe do I need to be scared? I don't know. Horrifying. Utterly horrifying. It deals with so many people's trauma, and sometimes I guess when you ignore that trauma and you let it get bigger and bigger and you repress it and you don't deal with it and you don't talk about it, and then you move into a house and the house is like, well, I'm gonna manifest this because you're living here and your trauma has nowhere else to go because it's trapped. It was also kind of a horror to read. It's the kind that makes you like wake up in the middle of the night and be like, wait, are my walls still here? Is my floor still here? Yeah, just like the thought that a room is not, I don't know, just like coming into a room that you think you know and finding out that the dimensions are changing. Yeah, why is that so scary? I've read a lot, like, you know, scary books too, but like these are the ones that just really, really disturbed me. So I hope I find a lot more scary books in the future, and are not disturbing. So also please leave your disturbing books down below so I can find more and freak myself out. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in my next video, and until then, please stay well, please take great fantastic care of yourself, and I'll see you then. So ciao.